Hi all. I hope you're faring well despite the difficulty of the news over the past few days, and whatever realm that you're dealing with it in the workplace or at home. As a student of culture and as a Christian, I have hope. My hope is that when things rise up in this kind of an intense way, usually change emerges out of it and good can come out of that. So, particularly for race relations in the United States and for voices that absolutely have not effectively been heard, I have hope. So, keep praying that we get through these next few days and potentially weeks as peacefully as possible. I want to call attention to a couple things. So, I loaded a video on on IQ last week or the week before, and I'm hoping that you watched that. We didn't talk about it directly, although a couple of you have alluded to it in your discussion forums. And I also loaded a video this week on EQ, and it's just a quick introduction. So Goleman is the one, Daniel Goleman, who is he's known as the person who writes about EQ and has researched it and defined a lot of these terms. So he's the primary person. I wanted you to hear directly from him. You can look up more videos from him. I have most of his books, and you can look up information that he's written. You can look up other people. But I want you to start pondering the influence that these ideas have on you as a leader, on those whom you mentor, on leaders under whom you may work or serve. What does it mean, our assumptions as a Western American culture about IQ, what that means to you as a person? How does that define your character? Does it define how you react in different situations? And what about EQ? That's kind of a new concept, not terribly new anymore, but for some of you it might be. So what does that mean, and how does that factor in? How does it factor in how you weigh the people that you serve under or the people that you work with? So we'll have space for commenting on that in some of the discussion forums. Also, I loaded a document that I want you to pay attention to. It is Aristotle's Rhetorical Triangle. It's just a PDF that you can click open. And this is critical as you are not only writing, but communicating with other people, to be aware of this idea of, so rhetoric is just a fancy word for communicating. And now we have so many different mediums with which we communicate. And this triangle, I've revised it just slightly by actually adding the word medium in the center of the triangle, which acknowledges that rhetoric is no longer just a speech. Or when I was in school, it was either a speech or an essay, and that was about it. Now we have so many variations, whether it's a tweet or it's a text or an email or a project that you're doing at work and you have to write up a report, all different mediums. So that's the first thing to consider. The main thing to consider here with Aristotle's rhetorical triangle is that it is purposefully a triangle because those three corners are considered equal. So rather than having a hierarchy, for example, purpose is considered the most important, which it is not in Aristotle's eyes. This triangle, all three corners are considered equal. And for most people, that is news. So the way that I was taught to write and to communicate from the earliest years back in grade school was to know, what's the assignment? What am I supposed to do? So the assignment is essentially your purpose, and it's given to you. Write a paper about butterflies. And then you pull out your World Book Encyclopedia if you're old like me, and you try not to copy too directly, and you come up with a report on butterflies. Anyway, purpose typically was given to us. As you get more adept and higher up in the workplace, you find purpose by perhaps a problem that needs to be addressed or information that needs to be imparted, and that becomes your purpose. Purpose is critical. What is important there is that you've got to know what your purpose is. Know what your purpose is and find a passion point for it. So if you're going to work, you don't sit down and say, well, I think between 9 and 10 a.m. I will write 5 emails. Who should I write to? That's not what it is, right? You open your inbox and then you, like me, panic a little and think, I got to get caught up. And then you start answering them. You have an internal sense of purpose in what it is that you do, the work that you do. Find that in academia as well. So if you ever come to an assignment that you're stuck on, is it possible that you yourself don't yet clearly know your purpose? The onus is on you to come up with the purpose. Gone are the days where I'm going to say to you, please write a report on butterflies. You need to come up with what your purpose is for what you're writing, that I hope is a little bit above and beyond what the assignment is. Because the purpose should not be simply to fulfill an assignment, but to actually get a claim across to your audience. That will make it more fun for you. It'll make it more interesting. It makes it more practice that you can actually use in the workplace. Audience is so critical to know your audience. And in this day and age, gone are the days when you would say, I can't know my audience. It's just a general audience. There's no such thing as a general audience. There are always ways to define your audience in some way, whether it's geography or gender or age or education level, race, religious background, religious beliefs, all kinds of things. You need to think through how to narrow down a sense of who your audience is so that you are better able to speak to them clearly. The better you know your audience, the more effectively you can choose the words that you use, the punctuation that you use, whether or not you have short sentences, long sentences. These are all intentional decisions that you need to be making based on your purpose and your audience. But there's a third corner that is equally important that most of us don't learn about. And on the Aristotle's rhetorical triangle, that corner is called the writer. And what we mean by that is not just, yes, of course, there has to be a writer. The writer is you, and if you don't exist, then the paper or the communication doesn't exist. That's too obvious. I like to call this the psychology corner. This is a place where you have a sense of who you are as the one communicating. So this is where these ideas of IQ and EQ potentially could come into play, not in terms of what's your IQ or maybe even what's your EQ, but what is your sense of your own. Because if you walk into a situation where you're communicating and you feel like you have the highest IQ in the room, or you feel like you don't actually measure up, those pieces are going to come through in how you communicate. So you need to have a firm sense of who you are. What is your background? What is your current age? What's your race? What's your gender? What is your education? What are your religious beliefs? What kind of home did you grow up in? What was the location of your home? Was it a neighborhood? Was it in the city? Was it in the country? All of these pieces factor into the wiring of who you are today. So now let's go back to your audience. If you are talking to an audience who has very different wiring from you, that's okay. That can be great because those can be the people that you most need to speak to. But if you aren't aware of that and therefore intentional about the words that you choose to use, and you ponder whether or not they will define that word the same way, if you don't take the time to think that through, you're not going to communicate very well, if at all. Even though we might all agree that in this particular situation, the language we're going to choose to use is English, the way that we receive each one of those words can be very different depending on all the different multitude of things I just listed. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the list of 3: purpose, audience, writer. The order that I talked about them in is the order that we typically are taught them or have to come to terms with them. But can you mix that up? It is just as important to know who you are as the writer as it is to know what your purpose is. Because if you don't, you're not going to communicate effectively. And that's where you send the email and you get an email back asking questions because you didn't think through who you are, or you didn't think through who your audience is, so much so that you anticipate the questions that they may have or the places where they may want to cover their ears and no longer listen to you. So all 3 corners are of equal importance, and this understanding goes all the way back to Aristotle's time, and then we toss into the mix this notion of medium, and you must have a sense of what medium you're using and how your language will change. That's where we crack down sometimes on traditional undergraduate students who might be 19, 20, and they submit an essay that sounds like a text. Whoops, you didn't have an awareness of your medium as well as your purpose, audience, and who you are as the writer. Let me know if you have questions about these. This is actually one of my favorite concepts, and it's something that's not just, ooh, taught that, started teaching it 25 years ago, kind of done with it for myself as a writer. Absolutely not. I actually think of all 3 of these every single time I write. And I want to encourage you to train yourself to do the same. I look forward to your next papers and the discussion forum. God bless.